I am excited today to have a very special guest. We've been trying to meet for 2 years, and I'm super excited. For the first time, I am sitting and meeting with Dr. Fred Putnam, a professor, retired professor of Bible and Liberal Studies at the Templeton Honors College. I'm so excited to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to finally have this happen.
Yeah,
Yes, very
we've
much.
been planning, I think for 2 years we've been trying.
Yes, yes, that's right. That's right.
Well,
Yeah,
I
but
was
life,
in,
life is uncertain and things just happen. So,
yeah. Well, I was so inspired to meet you, especially after I interviewed Dr. Brian Williams on a topic, what is the classical tradition? It was season fourth, but it was been a while ago. And
mm,
he shared a story about how he learned from you of looking at the sky and nature. And it was a very beautiful story that he shared on the podcast. And it made me go, oh, who is this man? I need to meet with him.
yes. Well, I'm glad
So
we can finally meet. Yes.
yes, yes.
Yeah,
And back and forth, you've sent many things, and I want to just at least tell our listeners up front what we're going to be talking about mainly is the
sure.
works of Josef Pieper. And I'm saying his name
Hmm.
correctly, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, Josef Pieper. And he is an expert. I am nothing of an expert on Josef Pieper. However, I know he's important to the tradition, which we're
Hmm.
going to learn about today as we talk with you. But up front, I will at least admit I have only read, well, I have read Leisure of the Basis of a Culture, but I haven't read it well. Like I need to do a really good reading of it, and I know it's a really
Yes.
important book. But the one book I have read very deeply and very well, it's a very tiny book, and in my opinion, every teacher should read this book. It is Only the Lover Sings, Art and
Absolutely.
Contemplation. This book is
Hmm.
absolutely beautiful. And I mean, I haven't read all his other works, but it may be one of his easier works. I don't know.
Hmm.
What do you think?
I was gonna recommend it as if people have never read Peeper, it's really the place to start.
Yeah,
It's
I think,
very,
yes.
yeah.
And I was attracted to it when I found it at a classical education conference bookstore.
Hmm.
It was probably at the Eighth Day Books table. And I thought, oh, the title is nice and it's short. And I glanced through some of it and I was like, oh, this
Right.
looks really interesting because it's all about art and music, which I think I will arguably say are the absolute most important fundamental foundation aspects of classical education. Like if you
Yes.
are putting art and
Yeah.
music as an appendage and a back burner on a classical education, you're doing it the
Mhm.
opposite way that it should be done. So
Mhm.
every
Mhm.
teacher, no matter whether you teach science, biology, chemistry, kindergarten, you don't know anything about art and music, like this book teaches you about being a human being.
Yes. Yes,
Right.
that's right. That's right.
And so at the end of the podcast, I am going to do something very unconventional. I always ask our guests for a book quote that has some meaning in their life. Well, today I'm going to share a few of my favorite quotes from that book.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
So,
Yeah, I look
what I'd
forward to
like,
hearing that. Yeah,
yeah, I
I'm very
want to just
interested.
dive into you telling us everything you want to tell us. Let's start off with your experience and your background in classical education.
Yeah, that's a great question. I well, I was on the faculty of the Templeton Honors College at Eastern University, and about 8 or 9 years ago, I forget when, we were approached by or our dean was approached by a classical system of schools and asked to devise a master's program for their teachers. And so eventually that went through several stages, and eventually we came up with what is now called the Master of Arts in Teaching, and then parenthesis in classical education. And I was part of the design of that program, but also taught in it for 7 or 8 years. I'm actually not sure of the dates um, until I retired this past summer. But before that, I'd begun. Uh, I don't want to take your podcast to tell this whole because it's a kind of a convoluted story. But when I started teaching 40 years ago, I was a pretty normal teacher. Lectures, quizzes, tests, grades. Everything was very much by the book, as most people would think of it. But gradually, I became convinced that something was wrong, and I taught Greek and Hebrew. Well, maybe I shouldn't say wrong. I became convinced that something could be better. Maybe I'll say it that
Mhm.
way. And I was teaching Greek and Hebrew mainly at the time, Old Testament interpretation, teaching in a seminary, a graduate school. And one of the things that intrigued me is that the Hebrew word lamad has two different functions depending on its form. So in one form, it's usually translated to learn. In the other form, which is a causative form, it's translated to cause to learn or to teach. And that started me wondering, is teaching, can you cause someone to learn something?
Mm.
And that's kind of how the whole question went, which I much later found out was actually a question that Socrates and Plato wrestled with. Aristotle addresses, Aquinas addresses it. It's Anselm addresses it. It was a universal question. I thought I was a little strange. I thought it was a little weird actually to even be asking that because the answer is obvious. Of course, I can
Mhm.
teach someone. I can make someone learn something. I just
Mhm.
have to tell them, and then they'll learn it.
Mhm.
But that so I would say I came into classical education kind of through the back door. I didn't know anything about it. I never even heard the term classical school until probably 8 or 10 years ago.
Mm.
Um, but when I discovered classical education, I thought, oh, I guess I'm not actually crazy. I guess this is okay to do things this way. So it's actually been about a 40-year process. And probably about 15 years ago, I made some significant changes in my own teaching and my approach to education that dovetailed well with what I came to see as classical education.
Okay, so tell us, give us a few examples of some significant changes that you made. That's interesting.
All my classes became seminars, even when I was teaching a language, when I was teaching the Bible, teaching poetry, they all became seminars. Um, I also wrote a rather lengthy appendage to my course syllabi. It's about 50 pages long. The students joke about it all the time, called On the Nature of This Course, because um, I had to explain what was going to happen in our class because students would come and be surprised that I wasn't standing up in the front lecturing using PowerPoint, that sort of that's what they expected. They expected to be asked to memorize things and to regurgitate them on tests and quizzes, and I wasn't doing that. And so I wrote this lengthy paper and gave it to them and explained this is what it means to read and why we read. This is what it means to converse and why we have conversation. This is what it means. This is why we do projects. I don't call them assignments. I just call them projects. I decided, for example, um, so when I started teaching, if I were teaching a course on Proverbs, let's say, I might have um, I might have said, okay, please everybody write a paper on Proverbs 13:22, and then I'd get 30 papers on Proverbs 13:22, and by the fourth paper, I was sick of Proverbs 13:22. Well, another one of the things that made me think maybe I'm doing something not right here. And and instead I just let students do whatever they want. And when I say whatever, I mean that. I've had students give me videos of ballets that they have choreographed and performed, songs that they've written and sung, works of art, um, essays, of course. Some students just prefer to write and write essays. But I've also gotten, so for example, in a Bible class, I might get a 5-page diary written by Sarah's handmaid Hagar, talking about what it was like to give birth to Abraham's first son. Um, or
So let me ask you. So were you, because I don't have that verse memorized. Do you- Proverbs 13, you said 22. So when you
yeah, I
say
just
you,
pulled that out of the air. I'm not
okay.
sure I have it memorized either.
So when you told them to do whatever they want, was that tied to a very specific theme that you were teaching? But you were
Yeah,
just
we
asking
were.
them to sort of um, demonstrate what they've learned from that theme in whatever mode they want. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, what I was originally telling them in the class, I was teaching them pretty particular method for interpreting Proverbs.
Okay.
I wrote a commentary on Proverbs. I've written a number of articles on it. So I I um I had something specific in mind. And this is one of the things, Adrian, that really got me thinking. I got One time I got two papers from two different students. They were both women, and One of them wrote a paper exactly what I was looking for. It was very analytical, very technical, very language or very linguistic. It was a brilliant paper.
Mm-hmm.
The other one wrote a paper that was essentially a 4 or 5 page story about something that had happened to her as a girl.
Interesting.
And when I said to her, this isn't what this isn't the assignment. This isn't what I'm looking for. I said, you should look at so and so's paper. And she exploded, and I'm using the correct word, exploded in tears and said, but I'm not that person.
Mm.
And I thought, oh my goodness, she's right. I need to think about how to help students become themselves.
Oh, you're making me cry.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Yeah, that's really a powerful story. Um, so it really changed you as a
Yes,
teacher, your
yes.
approach. I think I want to understand what a little more what you mean when you say do whatever you want, because that can, to some people, that can sound like, oh, this is just very like Rousseauian or unschooling or not teacher coached, teacher led, but very much just willy-nilly. I mean, you could call it, but I'm sure that it's not. I'm sure that you had some, you, when you give those assignments, you have something very intentional that you're looking for in terms of that kind of assignment. But I love what you're saying, because I think you're right. But I want you to unpack that a little bit more for our listeners who
Mhm.
may be thinking, well, that's not how we do classical education. We have to give them a very
You're
direct
right.
assignment.
You're right. It's not how most schools do classical education. Um, uh, yeah, what I make pretty clear, and actually in that paper, the on the nature of this course, which I'd be happy to send you, and you can share it with your viewers. If
Sure.
I mean, I'm
Yeah,
happy. It's not a
I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
sure, sure.
Okay.
Um, is that I give a long discussion of assignments. That's probably the longest section in it. And part of it is a lengthy list of examples. And there are some things they are not allowed to do. So they're not allowed to type a bunch of words into a computer and come up with an AI generated work of art.
Right.
If they do a painting, they have to write a paper to go along with the painting that explains what they did, why they chose the subject, and how they approached it. Um, and uh, and then on all their papers, every paper I wrote a letter back to the student. Um, and
Mhm.
in the letter, I didn't critique the paper so much as I said, these are the questions your paper raises in my mind. Why did you so for example,
Mhm.
a paper that is a painting or a project that was a painting, I'd say, why did you choose this moment in the story to portray? Why did you use these colors? Why is this figure? And try to help them think through, oh yes, why did I do those things? Is there a reason behind it, or was I just kind of slapping color on paper and turning it in? Now hopefully, and many times they've actually explained some of that in there, and they get better. And that's my idea is I want the whole course to be the process of learning, not I don't expect them to get it perfect the first time, but by the end of the semester, the quality's gone up. And actually, what I find is um, there does become a separation. The better students become more and more increasingly conscientious, I would say.
Mhm.
And so their projects get better in quality. There are some who just start out with something that's like, if I gave grades, it would be 100% the first time. But a lot of them progress. And sometimes there are people who blow it off. Yep, I know that. But no matter what the assignment is, there are people who are going to blow it off.
Mhm.
I can assign that proverb, for example, and some student can go find a commentary that I don't know about, that I've
Okay.
never read, quote the commentary or rewrite it slightly in his or her own words, and I don't know that they've cheated themselves, and out of learning. So one of my motivations is one of the things I try to say, and I say this, I don't leave it up to the paper. I mean to my paper that I wrote for them. I talk about this in class because they always ask. They say, "What do you mean we can do anything?" They ask your question exactly. What do you mean? Um, and I explain to them that I want them to do something that interests them, because if
Mhm.
it's interesting to them, the chances are that First of all, it's going to be better quality. And secondly, it's going to be a lot more interesting for me to read. And thirdly, it's going to forge between us a teacher-student relationship because I read it, I comment on it, and then I write a letter on it to them about it. And so it this is really based on my conviction that teaching and learning are relational activity,
Yes.
and I have to see them not as, I think it's James K. A. Smith who says our students are not brains on sticks, and instead they're whole people. And so my interaction with them has to be as a person, not as a head to be filled or as a quota to be, to be met.
Hmm.
So so when I say that they can do anything they want, they really can. They're not allowed to do some things like the AI generated art or music.
Sure.
They're not allowed to do wordles, where you type a bunch of words in and the computer, the online program makes the puzzle for you.
Hmm.
Um, very early on, when I first started doing this, I did get some students who would download pictures from the internet and color them and turn them in. And I said, no, you can't do that either. So I do have a list of things they're not allowed to do. So it's not really anything, but it's many things.
Hmm.
Many things.
Sounds fascinating. I wish I could be in one of your classes, or could have been. I've heard that you are a very sought after professor, and I'm understanding why now. um, could you talk a little bit about your course called The Ethos of a School?
That's a great question. That probably was one of my favorite courses. So in 2020, the year of COVID, I had a meeting. One of my MAT students, one of the MAT students, asked to meet with me, and we were talking. She said her school had ended with 100, the year with 120 students. This was in the summer. Her school had ended the year with 120 students. They had 180 students registered for the fall. And I looked at her and said, how are you going to maintain your identity as a school?
Mm.
You're going to have to hire 50% more teachers. You're going to, I mean, how are you going to do it? And out of that conversation came the idea for this course. How does a school establish and maintain over the inevitable changes an identity, or the identity that it wants to have? So when I say inevitable, teachers retire, teachers die, teachers move to other schools. Um, the population of students changes, which means the parents change, and some of the parents' expectation. Just there are just changes. That's just part of life. So how does a school, or we could say any institution, maintain its own identity? And so we started. I decided to start the course by reading a big chunk of this book,
Ah, an
the
anthology.
anthology, which I think if someone were going to start reading Pieper, they should read Only the Lover Sings First. Yes, that's right.
I have it,
That's
and I
right.
haven't read it yet.
Well, that's the second book to read.
Okay, good to know.
That's the second book. And I said we're going to start with this, and I try to, whenever I give assignments to students, I try to explain this is why I chose this book. I don't want to just give it to them and expect them to accede to it. Um, I said he begins the first main section is called Human Authenticity, and what he does, it's 90 pages. He says he goes through what is the meaning of virtue. That means that we are becoming. Well, he gives a number of little one sentence definitions,
Well,
but it
that's a
means
question that every classical educator should be able to answer, and they can't.
they
So just
can't, and that was exactly my point. Exactly. So first of all, every every classical school website I have looked at
right.
talks about either the virtues or training good citizens
Yep.
or upright. We all use that language, right?
Hmm.
My guess is most of us just use the words and have not really thought about what those words mean. And
Right.
Joseph Pieper goes through, first of all, what is virtue? And
Hmm.
then he says, now let's look at each of the virtues. Let's look at faith, hope, charity, or love. Those are the theological
Hmm.
virtues. And then prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. Those are the classical virtues. And he, and oh, I should say, I should have said, This anthology is his anthology. That is, a few years before he died, about 10 years before he died, someone asked him to go through everything he'd written. And his bookshelf of published works is probably 3 or 4 feet long, about 4 feet long. So he
Wow.
published a lot. Um, and to create an anthology. And so the selections are his selections from his own works, arranged the way he wanted to arrange them. So this isn't like an
That's
anthology of
fascinating.
English literature where
Just
some.
like a catalog.
It is, yes. It's
Mm,
actually
yeah.
his summa, if I can
Yeah,
use
yeah,
that
yeah.
word.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so I said, if we're going to have a classical school and we're going to talk about the virtues, we all need to be, when we say the word courage or fortitude, we all need to mean the same thing.
Sure.
We all need to
Yes.
mean, when we say prudence, we
Yes.
need to mean this, et cetera. We need to know what we're
This
talking
is so
about.
good. This is like why like our country has standards for education. Well, this then would be our standards
Yes.
for classical education. I can't believe I haven't read it. I'm so embarrassed. I mean, but now I'm listening to you going, why have I never it's
Well,
yeah, this
I
is really,
started
really
reading it
good.
about 25 years ago, maybe, and I said, I'm just going to read one selection a day because
Mhm.
Pieper is a very clear writer.
Mhm.
He actually gave a talk on the necessity for clarity in philosophical language. He's a very clear writer, but he's also so precise that you actually have to think about what he's writing. And so I said, I'll read one selection a day. So that's 1.5 pages, maybe, for most of them. But by the time I got about two-thirds of the way through the book, I couldn't wait, and I just finished it. It was so stimulating, so helpful. Um, because the next section that we read is not just about the virtues, but the next section is on knowing. What does it mean to
Mm.
know something? And and one of my mantras, if I can use that word, in all my MAT classes is that the first thing we have to talk about is learning. Everybody says teaching and learning, but that's actually that's backwards. The real order is learning and teaching because learning is the goal. And if I
Mhm.
don't know what it means to learn, how can I possibly talk about what it means to teach? And so I really have to think through what it means to learn something. And that's exactly what Pieper talks about. The second section on knowing is, what is it when I say I know something, what do I actually mean by that?
Mhm.
And he dissects that very carefully. There's some pretty dense paragraphs in there that we have spent 2 or 3 hours on in class, discussing. But what are we talking about, and why do we need to understand that? And as a school, this is why we had to, in the ethos of a school, if we don't if we don't agree, on what it means for students to know something, what do we how can we possibly pull in the
Right.
same direction? How can we
That's
work
right.
together?
Right.
And our
And
goal was,
it's not just about what does it mean to know something, but how do we get there?
yes, right,
Like how do
exactly.
we actually teach so that they really do know?
Right, well, that's a different question, right?
But it's really important
It's
and
a
it
big question.
matters so much. I mean, I think your example at the beginning here was that's how we teach. Well,
Hmm.
we, I'd love to just do like a whole class on that topic with you.
Yes, that would be fun. That would be
Yeah.
fun.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
No, no, that's fine. So then we also read in that class. We read Only the Lover Sings. We read, a book by Parker Palmer called "The Courage to Teach: The Inner Landscape of a Teacher's Life,"
Hmm.
uh,
I've
in
never
which
heard of that.
yeah, he was a very, I think he's since died, but he was a very well-known, he was a Quaker, but a Christian Quaker, I'd say, if I could say it that way, who wrote a number of books on education. In fact, one of his little books, called, I think it's "To Know as We Are Known," has a brilliant exposition of, 1 Corinthians 1, where Paul is talking about, the wisdom of God and the foolishness of the world,
Hmm.
and Palmer just goes through and says, "Hey, let's apply this to teaching and see what it is," and it's amazing. It's an amazing. But the courage to teach, talks about the teacher, and then he talks about learning in community, learning among ourselves as teachers, that is within a school, And of course he ends by saying, of course, none of this does any good if the direction the doesn't come from the top, that is from the administration, saying that what teachers should be talking about is not about students, but about what it means to learn and to teach. And that should
Hmm.
be the conversation in the teacher's restroom and the teacher's lounge or whatever. Um, that's what we should. That's what that we should be reading, thinking, taking, talking about that.
I agree.
Um, and then all we do is take our own particular subject and we just apply what we've been thinking about it,
Hmm.
rather than saying, what tricks have you learned? That's which is what we normally talk about, right?
Right. That's a big
Uh,
point right there.
that's a big yes, yes.
That's really
So we read
good.
that. Yeah, yeah. We read several other things that were helping us think about how do we uh, how do we give ourselves a common language. And I'm not saying that every school should use Pieper's definition of all the virtues, but he is the best place that I know of to start if we're going to have a conversation about what we mean by these words, because he makes us think about. He doesn't take anything for granted. He really says, look, we have to think through what this word means. But can I give you one example?
Please do.
So his discussion of prudence lies kind of, it's pretty close to the core of everything that he says, everything he writes. And he says prudence is the art of making the right decision based on the way things really are.
Hmm.
Because when he was quite young in his 20s, he read a statement by Anselm of Canterbury, in which Anselm says things are true. And that's actually a section in the anthology as well, the truth of all things. And what he means by that is that things, being what exists, that's true.
Hmm.
Truth is our attempt to describe the things that are.
Hmm.
And sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. We never get 100, a perfect match, but we try. And then the good comes out of what we think is true, because we always
Hmm.
act according to the way we
Right.
think things are.
Yeah.
One of my pre-course assignments in every course I taught for the past wow, probably, yeah, 20 years, or maybe not that long, but whenever she did it, is Catherine Schultz's TED talk called On Being Wrong, where she says we walk around thinking that we're right.
Mm.
And as soon as somebody points out that we're wrong, well, it's okay because now we're right. So we're always right. Um, eh, right? Yeah, that's so when Pieper says this about prudence, we think of prudence as, something like, do you think he'd take that risk? No, he's much too prudent. Meaning, we think of prudence as self-interest. He says, no, prudence is called by Aquinas and others the mother of virtues, because without prudence, no other virtue is possible.
Hmm.
Because prudence says, this is how things really are. Doesn't matter how I feel about them.
Hmm.
It looks away from me and looks at the circumstances. And then, if I really understand how things are, now I know what justice is.
Okay.
Now I know what the right thing to do is.
Hmm.
And then he quotes Aquinas, who says, um, the courage, the fortitude in any situation is directly proportional to the justice involved. So again, if I'm not seeing things the way they are, if I'm not being prudent, then how can I know what's just and how can I act with courage? It's not
Hmm.
bravery. So climbing a mountain without any ropes or helps or anything like that is not actually what fortitude means. That's actually, Pieper would say that's anti-prudent.
I'm curious. This is going to be a strange little rabbit trail, but everything you just
Sure.
said, when you said it and you pointed towards justice, could you say the same thing and replace the word justice with mercy or charity?
Well, that's the question, right? Because prudence says, given this circumstance, what is the right thing to do?
Hmm.
And the right thing to do, um, it because justice doesn't. So justice is being defined as giving to each according to his due.
Hmm.
What should each person have? Making sure that that's what's going.
Mhm.
And in some cases, some people, maybe what they should have is punishment of some kind,
Mhm.
discipline of some kind.
Mhm.
Um, and in other
But in a
cases,
sense, that discipline is an act of mercy and charity.
yes, that's right.
So, I mean,
That's right.
because I guess what came to mind was that verse that says where I think it's in the Psalm. I don't remember where it is. That justice and mercy kiss each other. Do you know?
Right, right, right. Yep.
And so I was like, I love that verse so much, and I'm always contemplating that. What does that mean? And
hmm
I'm enjoying the idea of prudence being tied to both of those words.
hmm
Try
hmm
so I've got the wheels are turning in my mind, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. So,
Yeah. No, no, you're right. You're right. It's that all these things, it's like a cascade or like a staircase. So
uh-huh.
prudence is at the bottom, and then we recognize justice and know what's right. We know what's right to do.
Right.
When we see things the way they are. He uses the example of an automobile accident.
Mm-hmm.
And he says if a witness can't recall things the way they actually happened, then justice is impossible, right? If we right, if
Explain
witnesses
that. Say
this,
that again.
well, if a witness to an accident is in, we're talking about court now, we're in
Oh,
court trying to
gotcha. Yeah.
establish
Okay.
who's to blame, and the witness says, oh, I don't know, I can't remember if it was the white car or the
I
black
gotcha.
car,
Right. Right. Right.
right? Yeah.
That's basic. I don't know why I didn't get that the first time.
No, no, that's I may be talking too fast,
No,
sorry.
it's okay. My brain is still kind of thinking about charity.
Yeah, right.
But I
Well, that's
see.
a fascinating one. How about this? Here's one. I'll tell you how he defines charity. I promise you, you haven't thought of it this way. He says, what do ice cream, a fine wine, ballet, say Beethoven's Fifth, what do they all have in common? Why can we say about all of those things and our spouse or, I love it. I love ice cream. I love this. I love.
Mm-hmm.
Why can we say love? What do we mean by that? And he says, and I'm cutting through a lot of discussion, okay? I'm just cutting to the chase. He says, when we say that we love someone or something, what we're actually saying, it is good that you exist. It is good that you are in this world.
Yeah.
We're
I was about to
joining,
answer it's good. That was like
yeah,
it's such a simple
and
answer, but yeah, it's
and not
good.
even that it's good for me, but it's good that it exists.
Yeah.
And he says what we're actually doing is we are joining God.
Mm-hmm.
Genesis 1:31, when God saw all that he had made, and behold, all was very good.
See, it is good. Yeah.
He says, it's right, Hine hakol tov ma'od, right, in Hebrew. So he says, very good. And so Pieper says, when we affirm someone else, we're actually saying, along with God, it is good that this thing exists.
Mm.
And by the way, I've suggested to students that they do that with someone whom they love. Look them in
Mm-hmm.
the eye and say to them, it's good that you exist. I'm so glad that you are in this world.
Mm.
That is that is overwhelming.
Yeah. All right. And I'm going to get a little political. I've never ever done this, but I would say that's why a core value of what should be a core value of all Christians, but a core value of me as a Christian is being pro life
Mm,
because a baby is a
hmm
good thing.
Yes,
Like
it
you look at a
exists.
baby, there's nothing about a baby that isn't good.
hmm
Nothing. A baby is the closest, I've heard somebody say, a baby is the closest that we can get to God, the
Mm.
perfection of God. They haven't been ruined yet by us. So, like,
Right,
when you
right,
look in the face of a baby,
right.
you are the closest that you can ever be on this planet at looking at God, is looking
hmm
at a baby.
This is Adrian's husband Brian interrupting this interview to tell you about an opportunity to join Dr. Putnam in studying Josef Pieper's anthology. This is for anyone who enjoys live and interactive seminar discussions. He has an amazing syllabus planned for Thursday evenings starting in September. After this interview, Adrian invited him to join the beautiful teaching team and offer courses on Josef Pieper. I hope you will join us. Space is very limited because he wants it to be an engaging, live seminar style discussion. All sessions will be recorded in case you are unable to attend all the meetings. Most importantly, this is designed to engage in a weekly discussion led by Dr. Putnam. For more details, visit beautifulteaching.coursestorm.com. Now, back to the show.
I have this essay here that I think you wrote, Josef Pieper Saved My Life.
Hmm.
Do you want to share
Hmm.
a little bit about that? I know that's probably what you were referring to as your long story at the beginning.
That's a little piece. That's actually a little piece of it. Just a little piece of it. Yeah. Yeah. I went through a period where things were very difficult. I don't want to be particular here because I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody or institutions or anything like that.
Sure.
But it was just a very difficult time. The institution where I was teaching and I were obviously going in. It became increasingly obvious that we were interested in had different values and were going in
Mm-hmm.
different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And and I felt very much alone. Was pretty. I don't know. I don't want to diagnose myself and say I was depressed. I'll just say, um, my wife would say I was oppressed. um,
Yeah.
Actually, she did say that. Um, and and in the midst of that, I left the institution, and and that's when I started reading the anthology. One
Oh.
chapter. I had it on my shelf for maybe 4 or 5 years and just never read it. Just somebody said, "Oh, you should read this someday," and I said, "Okay, someday I will." And I picked it up. I thought, well, maybe this says something. I'll just read this. It was just part of my daily devotions. That was how I started. And then I started reading a little more than one section a day. And I was sitting in a coffee shop. Well, my daughter was at a doctor's appointment, and I was reading his section. At that point, I was reading his section on reality, the two sides of the coin that is truth. So know how we know.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to this section that said, just titled "The Truth of All Things," and I turned the page and saw that title, and I just thought that's why I had to leave. Um, and and it said to me two things. It said to me first that I wasn't wrong, or at least I wasn't completely wrong about the way I was thinking about the way things should be, or the way things are, maybe is the better way to say it. Um, and also gave me the hope that if this person had I didn't know anything about Pieper at that point. That was the only book I had, the only thing I'd read. And I said, well, that if this person published a book saying these things, then maybe there are other people, and maybe I can find some other people who will um, affirm some of the same values.
Mm-hmm.
And so uh, I really, I wouldn't say I was in quite in despair. Well, maybe I was in those days. Um, Thought about leaving teaching. Actually, very seriously considered leaving teaching. Um, uh, and just didn't know what to do. But that really gave me hope, and so that was kind of when I started reading more than one section a day and was plowing through the rest of the book. And then I started looking for other books because, as you know, in the anthology, since they're excerpts, at the bottom
Sure.
he'll say this is taken from such and such. So I started looking up those books and read more and more. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
now I have a 3 foot shelf of Pieper um, on my in my study.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Leisure, the Basis of Culture, because that seems to be the book that everybody in classical education references
That's
all
the
the
book that
time.
everybody refers to. I
Oh,
wish they wouldn't actually, but
that's what I was going to ask you. What are your thoughts on that? Why? And yeah, let's talk about that.
well, it, it, I think it's a wonderful book. And what a lot of people don't realize is that it's actually two essays that have been put together. So one is the philosophical act, that's the second half of the book, and then Leisure, the Basis of Culture is the first half.
Mm-hmm.
The title, by the way, is actually by T.S. Eliot. He's the one who suggested that, and he wrote a lot of the you can get editions of it with T.S. Eliot's introduction. Roger Scruton wrote an introduction to another edition. Yeah, it's published by St. Augustine's Press. So there are several editions of it, different translations of it
This is the one
around.
I have.
Yeah, there you go. That's the same one I have. Yes, that's right.
The
Yeah. Oh,
Ignatius.
Ignatius. Yeah. Hmm.
I'd love to be read the one with Roger Scruton's.
Yeah, that's done.
Like,
That's looks like this.
yeah,
It's from St.
I
Augustine's
really,
Press in South
I
Bend.
like Scruton a lot.
So Ignatius Press originally did a lot of his books,
Mm-hmm.
and then that seems to have been taken over by St. Augustine's Press. They come out with a new book
Okay.
every year, a couple of years.
Huh.
A new
Okay.
some of them are repeats. They're retranslations of works that have already been out in English. Um,
Oh,
but
what language did he write in?
German,
Oh, okay. God. Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Maybe
he
it was
lived in
German.
Germany his whole life.
German name.
Um,
I should have
he
picked that.
learned English. He actually ended up translating The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis into German. He and his wife together
Oh,
translated
interesting.
it. Um, and I don't know if Lewis ever, I don't know if they ever corresponded or if Lewis ever read any of Pieper's works. Um, but he had read some of Lewis, and every once in a while you hear a phrase that doesn't sound Lewisian as though it was taken from Lewis, but you just think it has resonance with what Lewis
Mhm.
says, and you think, oh yeah, they're
Well,
kind of on the same
I see
wavelength.
that in some of the, like, I see that with, I talk about Charlotte Mason all the time. I see that
Yes,
it's
yes,
because the things that are true and good and beautiful talk to each other.
yeah, that's right, that's
Like,
right.
if it's really
Yeah,
true and it's really good and it's really beautiful, it's gonna be,
hmm
they're
it's
gonna
going to come
echo
true.
each
Yeah,
other,
yeah,
whether they
yeah. The
met or
permanent
not,
things.
yeah. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that's right. That's right.
So it's a good, I think it's a good book. He also has a section in here in the anthology, however, which is consists of three essays. One is called Leisure and its Threefold Opposition. One is called Earthly Contemplation, and the third one is What is a Feast?
Mm-hmm.
And and
Mm-hmm.
and that section, those three, free space in the world of work, we talked about those a lot in the ethos course, ethos of a school,
Mm-hmm.
because we said, you know, in a school you are going to celebrate certain things, and so what does it mean to celebrate? And celebration grows out of leisure. So
Right.
we hear the word leisure and people think of, well, depending on how old you are, you think of double knit leisure suits, right, in the
Mhm.
1970s, um, or we think of lying by a swimming pool in the
Yeah,
Caribbean, you know,
right.
sipping whatever you sip. um, but what Pieper means by it, by the German word Musse, is he actually means contemplation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So contemplation is not sitting around thinking great thoughts in Pieper, writing Pieper, what he's writing, or in Aquinas, from whom he's getting a lot of this. Contemplation is instead the the act of being still and paying attention to what
Mm-hmm.
is there, allowing ourselves to be taught by what is around us,
Mm-hmm.
rather than um so here's an example. Do you know the book How Children Learn by John Holt?
I do not.
Well, I know a lot of classical school people dismiss Holt because he became an unschooler, kind of the
Mm-hmm.
father
Mm-hmm.
of unschooling.
Oh, I
But
have
How
heard of
Children,
that. Yeah, I have heard what you're saying. I did
yeah,
have an interview with a podcaster who, or with a one of our schools that follows our work, and I interviewed them, and I remember him talking about this. Sorry, keep going.
well, no, but How Children Learn is I think that's a book that everybody who has anything to do with children, whether you're a grandfather or a teacher or anything, doesn't matter. A person should read that book. But at the end, he talks about how the mind works. That's the last kind of, the mind at work is actually the
Mm-hmm.
last chapter, and he says he one day he was with, this is back written back in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And so one day he's visiting some friends, and they have two children, and the two children are both playing with the Rubik's cube, and he
Mm-hmm.
says they both already knew how to solve it. And he said, but they were sitting there on the sofa, it was summer vacation, and they were sort of in that stage of just free thinking. They weren't trying to solve anything. They were just moving it and looking at it and holding it in their
Mm-hmm.
hands. And he said it was as though they were talking to it and listening to it.
Mm-hmm.
And his image is, they weren't lawyers probing it with questions. They were more like naturalists walking across a field and simply noticing what was there.
Yeah.
And I when that's the image that I have when Pieper talks about contemplation, being willing to let what is there teach me something, or change me.
When
or
I
whatever.
when I read Leisure, the Basis of the Culture, again, like I said, I didn't read it very well. I just didn't read it well. I just read through it without like that deeper contemplative reading that I should have done. But I do remember things that stood out to me were about feasts, and
Yes.
um, I remember because I became Orthodox in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
I've been Protestant my whole life, and so the idea of feast and liturgy has really just
Mm-hmm.
been like
Mm-hmm.
it's like a neon light in front of me now. And I remember
Yes.
noticing liturgy through
Mm-hmm.
Leisure, the Basis of Culture, and
Mm-hmm.
feast. Could you explain that a little bit to me?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really great question. And that section in his anthology, you might just want to turn straight to there and read What is a Feast? Because you can read the anthology.
Uh,
You don't have to read it sequentially. You can just pick out pieces.
hmm
Um, when Pieper talks about this idea of leisure, what he what he what he means is that um, we are opening ourselves to reality, but we can only do that because we believe that reality has its own existence because it's been created by God.
hmm
So that the ultimate contemplation, of course, is to contemplate God Himself.
hmm
Um, and that reality. So how do I say this? How do I say this? Okay, okay. So I'm going to go back to prudence for just a minute, and then I'll come back.
Okay,
Okay, so
sure.
um, when he says prudence, we have being, goodness, and truth, and being is everything that exists. When he says everything that exists, he means everything: God,
hmm
angels, demons, heaven, hell. All things, not just my laptop or the hamburger I'm eating or whatever it may be. He means everything, and that's why he says in a section on philosophy, he says philosophers must also consider, even no matter what they believe, they must include theology in order to do true philosophy.
hmm
Just as
Right.
theologians must be open to the whole of reality, including philosophical
hmm
discussion. So when he says we're going to, let me see, let me back up to where I think I've lost myself. Ask your question again.
The prudence. Well, okay. My question had to do with how Pieper, what he meant with leisure tied to feast and liturgy.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. So he has this beautiful statement. I won't take the time to look it up, but I'm paraphrasing. But he says if the reality of a man rising from the dead is not if a man rising from the dead is not a living reality in the life of the congregation, then what are we doing at Easter? We're not actually celebrating.
Right.
Because he says all celebration, true celebration, as opposed to, and festivity, as opposed to parties,
Sure.
all true celebration is founded in the affirmation of reality that comes from knowing that God and the work, creative and sustaining work of God underlies everything that exists. So celebration is any celebration, true celebration, is fundamentally a religious celebration, even if it may not look like that on the outside. But
Right.
of course, the person who is a Christian, who understands that, goes far beyond simply the surface. And we know that we don't celebrate Christmas because we like giving presents. That's not the goal,
Right.
or Epiphany, or
hmm
whatever else it may be, right? The Annunciation, or so when he asks what is a feast, he's really asking us, how do we understand God and his relationship to the world and to us?
Mm. Okay. Yeah.
And he says at one point, of course, if we're like Sartre and we think that human life is ridiculous, he said, how can we possibly celebrate a birthday?
hmm Good.
I mean, that,
Yeah.
which to me is a much more kind of, yeah, obvious example. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's good. I'm gonna have to return to leisure, the basis of culture, but you're telling me to
Sure.
go to the anthology to look up the part on the you said the feasts.
Yeah, yeah. Section 49. Well, and it's
Okay.
titled "What is a Feast?" So very
Okay.
easy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll go kind of dive into that again later on my own. That's really good. Yeah, I remember that that's really what stood out to me, mostly just because being an Orthodox is so is, I- I- my whole life I've been Protestant.
Mm-hmm.
And I became Orthodox when I
Mm-hmm.
was like 48. So yeah, so it's everything's just in neon lights to me when it comes to feasts and liturgy. Like just understanding, seeing liturgy every day.
Mm-hmm.
Every day, the
Mm-hmm.
sunrise and the sunset, every day
Hmm.
we live in a liturgy. The
Right.
whole
Right. That's right.
the whole cycle of life is liturgical, and until
Mm-hmm.
until I experienced a divine liturgy, I never thought about living every day as a liturgy.
Yes.
And I felt
Yes.
like what he was saying in that book was kind of bringing some of that out.
Yes. That's exactly right. Because what's fascinating is the title in German is Musse und Kult. Kult. Kult does not mean culture. Kult has to do with worship.
Interesting.
So I'm actually very puzzled by T.S. Eliot's choice of a translation for the title, because what Pieper is really saying is that contemplation underlies worship, and worship feeds the ability to contemplate.
Mm-hmm.
That is leisure.
Yeah.
The two of them are synergistic.
That makes sense. You're actually helping me to understand our interaction with icons a little bit better too right now.
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah, and that was something that took me a while. When I was a
Mm,
catechumen and choir in the Orthodox Church, what is this icon thing? Although I knew intuitively. I have like my personality is INFJ and my I for intuition is like off the charts high. So I
mm-hmm,
can't explain things very well, but I know that they're right because my
mm-hmm,
intuition is really strong.
mm-hmm,
So intuitively, I knew when people were venerating an icon that they weren't worshiping it. I know that that's a
mm-hmm,
struggle that a lot of Protestants have, and I understand that struggle. But I
mm-hmm,
knew intuitively they're not worshiping that icon. And once I understood that, when you were explaining that Rubik's cube thing, I
mm-hmm.
felt like, oh, that's kind of what we're doing with an icon. The
Hmm. Well,
icon
that's
is
a
a
great illustration. Yeah.
so an icon is a prototype of the person, the saint,
Mm-hmm,
which the saints are just our heroes. I mean, if you think about comic book heroes,
mm-hmm,
Wonder Woman
mm-hmm,
and Spider-Man and all that, the saints are the real heroes of the church,
mm-hmm,
of the
mm-hmm,
faith. They show
mm-hmm,
us how as Christians we ought to live
mm-hmm,
and pursue the Lord and sacrifice our life and lay down our life for, to live like Christ. I mean, Jesus says he commands us to live like him, to follow him, and the saints have shown us how to do that. And so when we go
mm-hmm,
to an icon and when we look at a saint, and we say to that saint, please pray for me, it's no different than asking you who are living in front of me, please pray for me.
mm-hmm.
And in fact, they are in the presence of God and have like a very direct access to him because they're in that realm now, that when
Mhm.
we ask them
Mhm.
to pray for us, we can be assured that they're going to pray for us. And so I
Mhm.
felt like when you were talking about that Rubik's Cube, I experienced that when I'm in liturgy. And the
Yes.
idea of liturgy in the Orthodox Church is that we are worshiping God in his presence with the saints, the church, what do you call it? The church triumphant,
Mhm.
right? The whole
Mhm. Mhm.
church. So the reality is that when we die, we aren't dead.
Mhm.
So when we are worshiping God in liturgy, the saints are with us worshiping God in liturgy. We're all together. We just can't see them.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
the icons are there to remind us that we're together and we're all worshiping God. And I guess when you gave that Rubik's Cube illustration, that's how I feel in liturgy when I know that these saints are with us. And when I
Yes.
see an icon on the wall at church, it reminds me, in the way that the kids were playing with that Rubik's Cube, kind of entering into the realm. That's what I got when you gave that Rubik's Cube
Mhm.
explanation. I don't
Mhm.
usually talk about
Mhm.
my faith on this podcast, so I'm getting really,
Mm.
uh, I don't know, what's the word? I'm getting very open here about my
Mhm.
personal life.
Mhm.
But I think it's important because I think that what he's talking about, and I'm understanding why he's important for us to read, is he's really helping us to understand what it means to be a human being and how important it is for us to see ourselves in the way God sees us.
Yes, that's right.
And
That's
that's
right.
why that's important to understand as a teacher, especially a
Mm-hmm.
Christian teacher, that
Mm-hmm.
if you can contemplate and understand how God sees us as people created in his
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
image,
Mm-hmm.
then it helps us to be better teachers. And it goes
Mm-hmm.
back to the story you gave of the two students, the one that wrote the paper you were looking for and the other one saying, I'm not her. And
Mm-hmm.
you had that aha moment of, oh,
Mm-hmm.
these are people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm understanding now what you're getting at with why Josef Pieper is pretty important for teachers to read.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the questions I asked my students, especially my MAT students, my main course was called Classical Pedagogy 1, but the title was The Culture of the Classroom. That was the title I gave it. And I said, one of the questions we have to ask as teachers, as Christian teachers, is how do we view our students?
Hmm.
Are they fundamentally flawed, dirty, rotten sinners um, that we need to whip into shape? Oh, yeah, they're made in the image of God, but really we need to whip them into shape? Or are they made in the image of God who happen to be flawed?
Right.
And how we answer that question as teachers is going to, and as a school, is going to change, is going to determine the
How?
culture of the school.
Yeah, so I'm going to dive in for just a minute if we have a little bit of time. Do we have a little more
Sure, I
time?
have time.
Okay.
I'm
So
retired.
I'm so enjoying this conversation. I don't usually go this long, but okay, when we're getting down the rabbit trail of how important it is to understand the philosophy of a child in order to teach well and be a
Mhm.
Christian teacher. And so recently have come into lots of conversations about that. And what is a child? And I love where you went with, are they just dirty rotten or are they made in the image of God? And but have a tendency to have vices, right?
Mhm.
But we
Mhm.
also have a tendency to pursue the good because God
Yes.
put that in us, right?
Yes. Actually, Pieper would say that's his first chapter in the anthology. He says, let not a man think when he chooses the right for the first time that he is setting his foot on a path never before trodden, but rather recognize that he is on something well established. And at the end of that, he says, the virtuous person is the one who has realized the divine design incorporated into the person.
Right. But that does not negate our need for Jesus to come and
No, of course
save
not. No, he's
us
not
and
saying
do what
that.
he did. But
Right,
I
right, right,
think,
right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, like, we need the Lord, but we also need to understand that it's important for us to look at a child and call them and help them to understand they have a nobility within them and they can
Yes.
rise up to that noble
Hmm.
self. And it's our duty as teachers to teach them that it's their duty as a child to do their
Hmm.
best and to
Hmm.
rise up to their noble self
Hmm.
and to
Hmm.
help them to become. I say this all the time on my podcast. We need to help children become their noble self
Or as
to
Pieper would say, become who they already are. They already are
good
that.
point.
The
They already
design is
are.
right there. It's already
Yes.
so one of the debates in Old Testament studies, which is my real academic field, I guess, is what does the image of God mean in Genesis chapter 1? And one of the answers to that, the one that I think is correct, is capacity. So we are made
Mm,
so that by nature. So when we say somebody does something naturally, we mean that their very nature, the way that they are made, means that they either are going to do this or they ought or they are going to eventually do it. They're going to grow into it. So Aquinas says at some point, fire is just fire. It does what it does because it's fire. But human beings aren't like that.
mm-hmm,
Human beings do the right when they have to choose to do the right,
mm-hmm,
even though it's what they're made to do. We're made to be like Christ, right? Every human being is made to be like Jesus Christ because
mm-hmm.
he's the model, he's the image, he's the
Yeah, that's great. My priest, I remember when I would sit in his classes when I was a catechumen, and he said that it is not natural to be a sinner. Jesus
right.
came to show us what the actual right natural way. Like we're off.
Hmm.
Sin has made us not natural.
C.S. Lewis says we're bent, right? We're
Yeah.
bent.
We're
Yeah.
not actually in our natural nature. The real nature of a human being Jesus came and showed us what
Mm-hmm.
right looks like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what it will be someday, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
When we see him, we
yep,
become like him.
yep, yep. But our job here is to pursue him so that his glory
Mm-hmm.
can fill us and we can
Mm-hmm.
reflect that
Mm-hmm.
glory as best as we're able,
Mm-hmm.
while we still struggle with our vices.
Yeah, yeah. So Pieper says that we have status viatoris. That is, our position is that we are on the way. We're travelers.
Yeah.
We're progressing.
Right. And that's, I mean, in Protestantism, we talked a lot about sanctification. That's what
Mm-hmm.
sanctification is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're working through the hard things in your life and they're sanctifying you and
Yep.
working out your salvation, Paul says. So,
Yeah, that and a lot of that Pieper even says addresses that question, not directly, but he says he says we're very Kantian in our view of morality. So in other
interesting.
words, Kant would say, yes, it's only worth doing if it's a struggle. And
Right. Interesting.
there are lots of Christian books out there about that, right? How to struggle through prayer, how to struggle through and to get a good prayer life, how to struggle through this or
Mm.
that or whatever else, how to fight your way through. Um, and Pieper is saying, well, no, actually, when we do those things, when we pray and talk to God, when we read Scripture, when we stop and think about who God is and who we are, we're doing what we're made to do.
Right. That's right. That's really good. Yeah. Oh man. I feel like we could keep going. I'm gonna I want to do my little unconventional
Sure.
thing here and
Mm-hmm.
share some quotes that I found from Only the Lover Sings, The Art of Contemplation, because I felt
Okay.
like this book really is very, very good. And it isn't long and it isn't hard to read. I didn't think it was hard at all. It only has
Oh.
76 pages. It's under
Mm-hmm.
100 pages. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so let me read a few quotes. Page 32. This is one quote, and they kind of each quote leads into the next. So I'm going to read a few
Mm-hmm.
quotes. This one says, "The average person of our time loses the ability to see
Yes.
because there is too much to see." So I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to say that one more time because this is so important right now with all of the computer time and screen
Mm-hmm.
time we're giving to our children, which we shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
doing, and to
Mm-hmm. Right.
ourselves. Okay.
Right.
The average person of our time loses the ability to see because there is too much to see. And he
Mm-hmm.
expands on that. And then the next quote on page 34, the bottom, he says, "Those no longer able to see reality with their own eyes are equally unable to hear correctly.
Yes.
This is
Yeah.
why we're having a lot of problems in the classroom with
Mm-hmm.
children understanding things." Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then 39, page 39, I will read. He says, "Music prompts the philosopher's continued interest because it is by its nature so close to the fundamentals
Mm-hmm.
of human existence."
Mm-hmm.
That is so profoundly true. This is why I think music is the basis of our existence. We were sung
Mm.
into being. I just I believe in the music of the spheres. I believe in the whole idea that music is what holds us together. I think God is always singing, always holding us together through his love of song and music. We just can't hear it because of our fall or whatever. I think we probably could hear. Adam and Eve probably could hear it.
Right. Right.
Right. And so I just feel like when that music is how, I grew up, my mother was a music teacher. I grew up in a
Mm.
home with
Mm.
good music. I went to college with my mom. She was going to Kent State University, majoring in music
Mm-hmm.
until I was 10 years old. And so I was able to sit in college courses and learn about music theory and beautiful music when I was very
Yeah.
young. And I remember
Yeah.
telling my mom, "I don't want to go to school. I want to come with you," because I loved everything that I was learning in her college classes when I was very young. I understood it. This is
Mm-hmm.
also why I believe in children understanding so much more than we think they can. They can
Absolutely.
pull in a lot. And so that I think influenced me deeply. I also started ballet when I was 4, and I became a very serious dancer when I was 8, and I danced 3 days a week till between ages 8 and 10, and from 10 on up, I danced 5 to 7 days a week.
Wow.
I was very, very much inundated in beautiful music.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
really have a strong belief that music is very important. So I'll read that quote one more time. Music
Hmm.
prompts the philosopher's continued interest because it is by its nature so close to the fundamentals of human existence.
Hmm.
Music
Hmm.
is really important. And then the last quote he says, and this is a longer quote. I'm going to read mostly the last paragraph at the bottom of page 50 to 51. This is his chapter called Thoughts About Music. And he
Mm.
says, we are willing to listen attentively to the essential message of this music, and that we let this message find an echo, as if on reverberating strings within the immediacy of our soul, is decisive. This will lead to new and rekindled clarity, authenticity, and vigor of our inward existence, to dissatisfaction with entertaining but hollow achievements, and to a sober and perceptive alertness that is not distracted from the realities of actual life by the promise of easy pleasure proffered in superficial harmonies. Above
Hmm.
all, this will guide us to turn with resolve, constancy, courage, and hope toward the one and only good, by whose grace our inner existence yearning finds existential yearning finds fulfillment. I really botched that
Hmm.
up. So just buy the book, and that's on page 50 to 51.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
mean, he's really unpacking here how important it is to attentively listen to music,
Yes.
because it's going to help us understand God's grace and his
Hmm.
goodness. And it's very fulfilling to our deepest yearnings to be able to listen well to music. This is why I'm a huge, people who know me know, like, picture study, music study, listen to music, go out in nature, look at nature, just enjoy the beautiful things in life, because that is going to be the most important way that you become more human.
Yes.
So anyhow,
That's right.
those were my Pieper quotes from the one book I read.
Well, what you just said is that's actually what I started doing in most of my classes. So whenever I taught poetry, we would read the poem and I would simply ask, what do you notice? You weren't allowed to ask, what does the poem mean? Nobody, you weren't allowed
No,
to. You could ask, what does this word mean? That's okay. But just what do you notice? And inevitably that led to this is what would happen. We would start that we had a 50-minute class. It would be time to stop and people would just say, already? They would be astonished that 50 minutes had gone by like that
on one question.
on one question.
Yeah. This is what I do in all my teacher trainings. I say there's three questions for picture study, nature study, every literature story you read. What did you notice? What do you wonder? What does it remind you of?
Yeah, right,
And that can
right.
fill an
Those are
entire
brilliant.
class time.
Yep.
That's
Oh,
it.
yes.
That's all you,
Yep.
like, if you're a classical teacher and you don't know how to teach classically, just put those three
Hmm.
um, prompts on your desk and just ask them all the time. When you're
And then
teaching
shut
math,
up, right?
when you're teaching yes, exactly.
Let
And
them talk.
those three questions are basic, like the basic 101 throw the ball out question for
Hmm.
seminar.
Hmm.
You don't need to
Hmm.
know more than what do you notice, what do you wonder, what does it remind you. You do need to establish a trust in your class that your
That's
students are
right.
going to feel like they can actually talk without being
That's right.
shut down, and the teacher doesn't need to repeat what the child said, because then that child feels like, why did I just say that when my teacher just resaid what I said? The teacher just needs to be quiet.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
right.
do you know Don Finkel's book,
No,
Teaching with Your Mouth Shut?
no,
It's
but that
about
sounds
published about
perfect.
25 years ago. Yes, it's excellent, really, truly excellent. Donald L. Finkel. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
this is.
that idea that well, that's what we're taught, right? What's the teacher's job? The teacher's job is to tell,
Mhm,
and instead, maybe the teacher's job is to listen and
mhm.
ask questions, and
I
then
agree.
be quiet.
The teacher's job is to put the good, beautiful text in front of the student
Yes, that's right. That's
and
right.
then listen.
Make sure
Yeah,
that you're choosing something worth discussing, right?
right.
Worth noticing. Yeah.
Because they really have a lot they can say about it, and it's amazing to teach this way. It's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful.
Yes, it is.
So,
Yeah.
well, this was super fun. I'm so happy to have met you,
It's
and
wonderful.
I probably will be calling you again because this was really fun.
Thanks, Adrian. I look forward to it. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you.